In this video, I'm going to show you how to work the 8-row lace pattern featured in my Farro vest, as well as how to use stitch markers with this lace pattern to help you keep track of the repeated lace sequence. I have created this swatch here, so it's similar to my vest with 2 edge stitches on either side of these edge panel markers. And so that's what these purple markers are going to represent. And then the lace pattern is in between. So before we get started, I'm going to show you how to place markers for the stitch pattern. So you're going to want to use removable stitch markers. It's very important that they are removable, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But to start, we're going to place our first marker 7 stitches in from this first edge marker when the right side of the work is facing us. So I'm going to count 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And place a marker. And then the rest of them I'm going to be placing with 6 stitches in between. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and there should be 6 stitches now between the last lace marker and the other edge marker. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so again, we have 7 stitches in between the first edge marker and the first lace marker. Then the rest are all spaced with 6 stitches in between. So now let's get started with row 1 of the stitch pattern. So first, I'm just going to knit my edge stitches. Slip that marker. Okay, so now we're officially beginning row 1. So row 1 starts with a knit 1. And then there is a star, and so that's how you know that we're beginning the repeated sequence. So the first stitch to do is a yarn over. So to do a yarn over, I'm going to take the working yarn and I'm going to bring it in between my needle tips to the front of the work and then over the top of the right needle. Then it says to SKP, which stands for slip, knit, pass. So I want to slip the next stitch on my left needle knitwise. So I insert my right needle tip as if to knit into that stitch, but without working it, I just slide it over to the right needle. And then I knit the next stitch. And then I insert my left needle into the second stitch in on the right needle. This was the stitch that I had slipped, just like this. And then I'm going to lift it up and over the last stitch on the right needle. Oops, up and over and off of the right needle. So we've completed the SKP. Then it says to knit 1. Then knit 2 together. So I take the right needle, insert it into the next 2 stitches on the left needle, just like that, and knit them together. Then we're going to work another yarn over and then knit 1. And now we've reached our lace marker. So that makes sense. We just finished that sequence. So then I'm going to slide that marker over. So then the pattern said to repeat from star till the end. And so the star again starts with the yarn over. So again, I'm going to bring the yarn to the front of the work, then work the SKP. So slip knitwise, then knit the next stitch, then insert my left needle into the second stitch in on the right needle and lift it up and over and off of the right needle. Then we knit 1. Then we knit 2 together. Then we yarn over. And then we knit 1. So as you can see, now we've reached that lace marker. So that entire sequence always fits in between our lace markers. So we'll slide it, and then we're going to do another repeat. So again, yarn over, then slip, then knit, and then pass the slip stitch over. Then we knit 1, Then we knit 2 together. Now let me just give you an example. Let's say at this point, my phone rings, the dog is barking, I have some kind of distraction, and I have to put the work down, and then I come back to it. Now, if we didn't have these lace markers placed, it might be very overwhelming to figure out where did I leave off with this lace pattern. But because we have our markers, we know that we're in a particular sequence, and it's just much easier to see, okay, I only have 1 stitch left here before the end of the sequence. So I can look at my sequence and see, okay, then I probably just worked a knit 2 together here, and all that's left is for me to do the yarn over and knit 1. So by using these markers, it really helps for you to be able to identify where you might have left off. And it also helps so that you can see if you've made a mistake. And I'll show you in just 1 second. Let me just finish up this next sequence. So knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 1. Okay, so the other thing that you could do, especially if you're new to lace and you're not feeling super confident about your stitches, is after you've finished a sequence, you want to count and make sure that you have the same number of stitches in between as you had when we had set things up. So there should always be 6 stitches in between each of these, again, except for that very first set where we had 7. So it's helpful to be able to count these every now and then, because if you count and you say, uh-oh, I have 7 or I have 5, it's much easier when you're still on that row to go back and fix any potential mistakes. So that's just another advantage of using these lace markers. Okay, so I've slid my marker. I'm going to do the repeat again. So again, yarn over, slip, knit, pass, then knit 1, knit 2 together, yarn over, and knit 1. So let me slide the marker. So we only have 1 more repeat left. Yarn over, slip, knit, and pass, knit 1, knit 2 together, yarn over, and knit 1. And so then I'm just going to slip my edge marker here and do my knit 2. Okay, so row 1 is now complete. So now I'll turn my work, and row 2 and all wrong side rows in this pattern are just to purl all of these stitches. Now the only thing I'm going to do first though is, because we have our edge stitches that are worked in garter, the 2 stitches on either end are always going to be knit. So then I slide, but then all of the stitches in the lace pattern are going to be purled. So I'm just going to go ahead and purl to the end, just making sure to slip my lace markers as I reach them. So here we are to the first one, and I'm just going to slide it over. So I will just purl all of these stitches to the end. Okay, I've reached my end. I just slide my edge marker there and then knit my 2. Okay, so row 2 is now complete, and we're ready to work our next right side row, which is a row 3. So let me show you how to work that row. So again, to start, we're just going to knit our edge stitches, slip our marker. Okay, so now we're officially starting row 3 of the lace pattern. So just like row 1, row 3 first starts with a knit 1, and then there's the star, and that begins the repeated sequence. And so now you might be understanding why for that first set, we had placed this marker after 7 stitches, and then all the other ones were 6, because at the beginning of these right side rows, we're working a knit 1. We're going to be doing that on all of them but 1 right side row. And then we're going to have to change things up a little bit, but I'll show you that when we get to it. So row 3 begins with that knit 1, and then there's the star, and it says to knit 1. So now we're beginning that repeated sequence. So knit 1, yarn over, and then it says to SK2P. So that stands for slip, knit two together, pass the slip stitch over. So we start with the slip. So just like our previous SKP, I'm going to insert the right needle into the next stitch on the left needle knitwise, just like this, and then slip it over to the right needle without working it. Then we're going to knit two together, just like that. And then we're going to pass the slip stitch over. So insert the left needle into the second stitch in on the right needle. That was the stitch we slipped, and lift it up and over and off of the right needle. Then it says to yarn over and then knit two. Okay, and so that ended our sequence. We've reached our marker. So then it says repeat from star. So again, the star began with the knit one and then yarn over and then SK2P. So let me show you that again. We're going to slip. Then we're going to knit two together. And then we're going to insert the left needle into the second stitch in on the right needle and lift it up and over and off of the right needle. Then we're going to yarn over and then we knit two. And here we are at the end of our sequence. And again, we've reached the marker. So I'm just going to continue that repeated sequence until I get to the end. Okay, I've just reached the end of my row 3 of the lace. I slip my edge marker and knit two. Okay, so then row 4 is a wrong side row. So just like row 2, I'm just going to purl all of these lace stitches and continue working my 2 edge stitches in garter, which is just knitting every row. So I knit those 2, and now I will purl across all of these lace stitches. Okay, reach the end, slide my edge marker and knit 2. All right, so row 4 is complete. So now we're ready to begin row 5. So let me show you how that is worked. Okay, so row 5, just like rows 1 and 3, first begins with a knit 1. Then there is the star, so you know we're beginning the repeated sequence, and that starts with a knit 2 together. Then a yarn over, then knit 1, then yarn over, then SKP. So that's where we slip, we knit 1, then we insert the left needle into the second stitch in on the right needle and lift it up and over and off of the right needle. And then we end with a knit 1. And here's our marker. And so then I'm just going to be repeating that sequence across the row. So again, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, then slip, then knit, then pass the slip stitch over, and then knit 1. So let me just take a quick moment to show you, you know how I mentioned before that you can count every now and then to make sure that you have your 6 stitches in between each of your markers, except of course the first one, which will have 7. But let's say that you count and you don't have 6 stitches and you want to be able to go back and fix things. What you're going to want to do is tink. And so tink is knit spelled backwards. It's a abbreviation used to describe unknitting. So it's kind of clever, knit spelled backwards. I have a whole video that shows you how to tink, but I'll show you how I would do it in this particular lace pattern. Usually what can be especially tricky is how do you undo a slip knit pass? So I'm going to show you how I do that. But first, so if I'm just, this last stitch was a knit 1. So I'm going to turn the work so you can see more of the wrong side. And I want to go into the loop that this stitch is coming out of. So I can tell it's coming out of this. Sometimes you can pull up on the working yarn and that really helps to see which loop it's coming out of. And then I'm going to stick my left needle into that loop, and then I'm going to take that stitch off. So I'm securing this loop as I'm undoing the stitch that's on the needle. Now, this next stitch is that SKP. So how do you tink back on an SKP? So what I would recommend doing is, you can see as I'm pulling up on this loop, this stitch is coming out of two loops here, this one and this one. The best option is to take your left needle, and I'm going to secure these two loops, but coming from the back to the front. So going into it like this, and even use your other hand if that helps. So I'm going to go into this loop here and then go into this loop here. And then I'm going to take the stitch off like this. But as you can see, these stitches are now twisted on the left needle. So to untwist them, all I'm going to do is insert my right needle into each of them just like this, and then put them back on the left needle like this. So now I've reoriented them in their proper direction. And then let me just tink back the rest of that sequence. So this was just a knit one. So again, I can kind of pull up on my working yarn to see which loop that's coming out of. Yep, it's coming out of that one. Then undo my yarn over. And then the last stitch was a knit two together. So how you would tink back on a knit two together, see how it's coming out of these two loops. I can just go into each of them just like that, and then undo the stitch. And unlike an SKP, when you unknit a knit two together, they go back on the needle in the right direction. Whereas the SKPs, when you go into them, they're twisted. So you don't have to do anything after a knit two together. So now I'm just going to go ahead and be repeating that sequence of row 5 until I get to the end of the row. Okay, so I've reached the end of lace row 5. I'll slip my edge marker. I'll work my knit 2. Okay, so then I'm ready to work row 6, another wrong side row. And so just like all the other wrong side rows, I will purl across all of the lace stitches to the end. Okay, so I've reached the end of row 6. All right, so I will turn my work. And so now we're going to be ready to begin row 7, but this is where things change up a little bit, and this is why you're going to learn. I had said that you need to use removable markers for our lace markers. Now, as you remember, I had mentioned that in rows 1, 3, and 5, our first sequence here always started with a knit 1, and then the 6-stitch sequence followed that. And that's why we had 7 stitches in between these two, and the rest were just 6. Now, the issue with this particular lace pattern is that on the last right side row, on row 7, it starts with a knit 2 together and then works a 6-stitch repeat. And so because it starts with a knit 2 together, not a knit 1, that throws off all of the numbers here. And so that's why sometimes people think you can't use lace markers when you encounter a stitch pattern like this. But you can, but you just have to adjust where these markers are placed on that particular row. So for this Farro lace pattern, what you need to do if you want to use lace markers is that before you begin row 7, you need to shift all of your lace markers by 1 stitch over to the left. So let me show you how I do that. So let's make sure to start with our first marker here. And I like to hold it in this way where I'm taking my left hand and making sure to sort of place my finger where I want the marker to go. So it's right here. I want to move it 1 stitch over. So I sort of just place it here so I don't lose track. And then I detach it. and then put it one stitch over to the left. And so then I'm going to do that with each of these markers. Just moving it one stitch over to the left. So once you've done that to all your lace markers, you can count to make sure. What you should have is 8 stitches now between your first edge marker and the first lace marker. You should have 5 stitches between the last lace marker and the other edge marker. And then in between all the other ones should be 6 stitches. Okay, so now that we've realigned our markers, we're ready to begin row 7. Okay, so I will start with my knit 2, slide my edge marker. Okay, so now we officially are beginning row 7. And as I mentioned before, it starts with a knit 2 together. And then there's the star. So we know we're beginning our 6-stitch repeated sequence. And that begins with a yarn over. So bring the yarn to the front and then over the top of the right needle. Then we're going to knit 3. Then it says to yarn over again. And then SK2P. So again, that is where we slip knitwise. Then we're going to knit the next 2 stitches together. And then we want to pass the slip stitch over. So we insert the left needle into the second stitch in on the right needle and lift it up and over and off of the right needle. And as you can see, we've reached the end of our sequence. So I just slide the marker and then it says repeat from star. So again, that starts with a yarn over, knit 3, yarn over, then SK2P, so slip, knit 2 together, and then pass the slip stitch over. And we've reached our marker here. Now, one thing I want to note is that as you're working row 7, your stitch count in between your markers is now going to be going back to how it was for all the other rows. So after you've worked that first sequence, it should be back to being 7 stitches in between here. We can count to make sure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it is. And then all of these are going to be 6 stitches again, including here. So once I finish here, this should be back to 6 stitches. So I'll show you that once I get to the end of this row. So I'm getting close to the end of my row. So I have a yarn over, knit 3. Now row 7 had said to work that sequence over and over again until 5 stitches before the end. So not all the way to the end, to 5 stitches before the end, which, if you remember, that was the amount of stitches we had between here, our last lace marker and our edge marker, because these last 5 stitches are going to be worked a little bit differently than the other areas. So it starts the same. We do a yarn over, and then we knit 3, and then we yarn over. But instead of working a SK2P, we're just going to be working an SKP. So I'm just going to insert, do my slip stitch, then knit, pass the slip stitch over, and then we're at the end. So I slip my marker and I knit 2. So now when you count the amount of stitches in between all of your markers here, it should be back to where it had been when we originally placed the markers. So we have 7 stitches in between here. We have 6 stitches in between all the other areas, including that last area. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So you don't need to realign the markers to begin row 1 again. They already go back to where they need to be after you finish row 7. And so then the last row of the stitch pattern is row 8, and that's where you're just going to purl all your stitches again to the end. So I hope this visual of working this 8-row lace pattern featured in my Farro Vest has helped, not only to show you how to work the lace stitches, but also how you can utilize markers to really help you keep track of that repeated sequence. Happy knitting!